Hi, I'm Gary Ralph, and I forgot to use the sign for the second part of the lecture on World War II, but I remembered to use it this time. This is a lecture about gay and lesbian civil rights after World War II, and it's part two of that lecture, which is one in a series of lectures that I'm doing about lesbian and gay history in the United States for History 156, American Sexualities. So I was talking about the fact that in the 1950s, there was a lot of pressure, actually, from the government to try and get gay people out of the government. And the idea, they gave all sorts of justifications that I explained. There was also this idea that gay people and lesbians were just sort of screwed up, and you didn't want screwed up people working for the government. But it was basically just prejudice and ignorance. There was actually, in the 1950s, there was an investigation established. We are all sort of aware of the investigations of the Un-American Activities Committees that were sponsored by Joe McCarthy. And McCarthy, even though he had two very out homosexuals working for him as legal advisors, was at least as aggressively antagonistic towards homosexuals as he was towards communists. So there was this kind of holding up to the American people the idea we can't have communists in the government. And it was, as I say, it was at least as difficult to defend yourself from being accused as a homosexual as it was to be accused of being a communist, because in both of those cases, the people who really were gay and lesbian and the people who were communists were invisible. You couldn't see them walking down the street. And one of the reasons that maybe the gay and lesbian political movements for civil rights didn't take off as quickly or as broadly as they might have is that you could pass for straight if you were a gay or a lesbian. You could try to conform to social norms. Of course, you could completely suppress your sexuality altogether and not go to bed with people of the same sex, which is something that people did. Or if you did do it, you could do it in such a way that it was very discreet and nobody on the street would know who you were, that you were gay. Maybe not even your friends and family would know that you were gay. It would be something that would be completely between you and the person you picked up by some means or another. And of course, if you're doing this, then it's very difficult to establish the idea that homosexuals deserve civil rights under the law. I explained some of the reasons that gays and lesbians were denied civil rights after World War II as veterans. And it was very difficult to get people to come out because they didn't know how many people would be supporting them. I mean, it's if you come out as a gay man and then there's nobody else who comes out as a gay man, your immediate tendencies go, oops, and you kind of, jump back into line and pretend it was all a mistake. So all honor to the few people during the 1950s who did establish and support organizations in support of gay and lesbian rights. The first one was founded in 1951. It was called the Mattachine Society, and the word Mattachine is very obscure. It had to do with this kind of, countercultural type of person who was around in the Middle Ages. In fact, as a historian, I've never even encountered the word Mattachine except in this context of this organization. But the people who were founding these organizations, of course, were trying to pick names that wouldn't make it too clear what the organizations were about. So that if somebody, discovered that, quote, you were a member of the Mattachine Society, unquote, it wouldn't really matter to them because they would have no idea what the Mattachine Society was. The Mattachine Society that was founded in 1951 was founded by a small group of members or former members of the Communist Party, which it seems like it would be a very unlikely thing to have happen. But in fact, the people who were forming the organization had several goals in common with the communist movement. They were trying to change society. They were trying to make it a better and happier place for themselves and their fellow gays and lesbians. However, and they were being aggressive about the idea that gays and lesbians should change their consciousness about being gays and lesbians. One of the things that people in the communist movement talk about is consciousness raising, the idea of becoming aware that you are a member of the oppressed working class, or something like that. Similarly, the people who were founding the Mattachine Society were saying we have to become aware that we are oppressed members of the gay and lesbian community. But this was a little bit too tough for a lot of people to swallow. The first group of people who were joining the Mattachine Society were obviously people who agreed with the ideas of the founders, that we should be aggressive in terms of changing society and also changing gay society in order to become more proud and have more positive images of ourselves. And there was some actually interesting developments. There was one group of people who kind of split off from the didn't split off, but they formed a kind of subgroup, which eventually ended up operating independently. And they started an organization. They started a magazine called One, O-N-E, in 1953. I didn't make a chart for that for some reason. Which was, you read the issues some, 75 years later, and they're presenting a lot of very upfront arguments about why gay people and lesbians should kind of put their hands on the steering wheel and not allow society to define them and put them in boxes. But the people who were writing and publishing this magazine were a very small group, and they were much, much more aggressive and much further ahead politically than even the members of the Mattachine Society. In fact, the organization that was publishing One ended up being pretty much a separate, although affiliated group. Not everybody who joined the Mattachine Society was interested to begin with. They weren't very happy about the idea that the leaders were identified with the Communist Party, because after all, this was the 1950s, and for a lot of people, that seemed to make it even more dangerous to join an organization. To begin with, you were joining an organization that supported gay rights or lesbian rights, and then the people who were leading the organization were people who might conceivably be arrested and thrown in jail because they were communists. So after a few years, the organization kind of underwent a change. In 1953, the people who had founded the organization were kind of voted out of office. And in fact, some of those people were saying, we're probably going to stand in the way of this organization becoming successful. And at first, the membership really dropped because the people who had joined the organization were often people who had liked this idea that we should become very aggressive and positive. But there began to be another group that joined the Mattachine Society. And these were people who were sort of concentrated on the idea of let's try to fit in. Let's try to get society to accept us, which was not this kind of aggressive idea to change society. It was the idea that we should be very nice to the people in society, and maybe they will change their minds about oppressing homosexuals. If you look back, when I was looking at the Mattachine stuff in not so much the One magazine, because it continued to be rather aggressive in terms of saying society should change, but you look back at the materials that the Mattachine Society published, and you're like, oh, a bunch of wimps. Why don't you get it together and realize that, it's your way of bettering yourself is not necessarily to have public lectures where you invite psychiatrists who think homosexuality should be cured and let them preach to you about what they think, because you probably know more about gay and lesbian life than the psychiatrists do, since you are gays and lesbians. But at the time, it was probably, considering it was the 1950s and there was all this legalized persecution, really, of gays and lesbians, it was probably not time for something like the early Mattachine Society. It was probably more time for something that would be a compromise organization, which is what the Mattachine Society became in 1953. One thing that didn't change about the Mattachine Society, however, was that it was primarily an organization of men, and sexist society being what it was, the men were not really very welcoming of lesbians and not inclined to treat them as equals. There was this kind of condescending attitude among a lot of the members of the Mattachine Society that where lesbians are certainly welcome, it was like, but there's the idea, when they talked about the Mattachine Society, they were mostly talking about gay men. It was like, if you reminded them, they say, oh yeah, there are lesbians too. So the time was right to form an organization that would be specifically for lesbians. And that organization was founded in 1955. And it was called the Daughters of Bilitis, another one of those names that was intentionally meant to be incomprehensible to people who were not in the know. There was a group of poems that had been written around the turn of the century called Songs of Bilitis, which had lesbian content. But it wasn't exactly a bestseller. Nobody really knew about it. You probably wouldn't know about the Songs of Bilitis unless you were already a lesbian and had been going out looking for lesbian-oriented literature. So in 1955, the Daughters of Bilitis were founded by a couple named Del Martin and Phyllis Lyon. Actually, Phyllis Lyon died just a couple of months ago at the age of 100 and something. It had started as a social club. It had started as a place for gays and not gays and lesbians, for lesbians, only lesbians, to be able to meet each other when they were dissatisfied with lesbian bars, which had a lot of problems, including this problem I was talking about before, the sort of domination of the butch-femme dichotomy. A lot of lesbian bars were oriented around this, and if you didn't want to play a butch role or a femme role, you were not going to have a good time in these bars. So Martin and Lyon started this club, which was basically a way for lesbians to get together other than at the bars. But then they knew about the Mattachine Society, and they didn't exactly say, well, let's have a lesbian version of that. But they realized that there was a function that the Mattachine Society was fulfilling, other than socialization, that lesbians should probably take on also. So they began to expand their organization. They published a newspaper for the Daughters of Bilitis called The Ladder. There were various groups of organizations affiliated with the Daughters of Bilitis. They began to form in other big cities. And it became, again, like the Mattachine Society, it never acquired so many members that it had a salient position in the consciousness of American society. It was occasionally mentioned in the media. But the Daughters of Bilitis, probably more than the Mattachine Society, oriented itself as a self-help organization. It was like, if you're having troubles, if you can't accept yourself as a lesbian and you having troubles feeling good about yourself, join the Daughters of Bilitis and get together with other people who are going through the same issues. Of course, one of the problems with that was that there was a certain amount of turnover, because if you joined the organization and you got to the point where you felt good about yourself as a lesbian, you say, okay, now I've done what the organization is for, so I'm going to move on. So it was only the people who were really interested in keeping an organization like this running that were sticking with it. It's interesting because we're moving into the period of gay history where I was alive. One of my friends in Wilmington was a woman named Barbara Giddings, who lived just around the corner from me, and who had joined the Daughters of Bilitis in 1958. So we're moving into the period where a lot of the early sort of the pioneers in this aspect, this period of the gay and lesbian movement, were people that I knew when Barbara was old enough to be my mother, but I knew her as a fellow fighter in the gay and lesbian movement. And a lot of these, when the corner was turned in 1969 with the Stonewall riots, most of these people were aware of the Mattachine Society and the Daughters of Bilitis. I was certainly aware of it when I came out in 1975, and both of them were still in existence at that point. But a lot of people who were involved in the Stonewall riots were saying to themselves, that's the old way of doing things. The Mattachine Society and the Daughters of Bilitis are being very apologetic about being gays and lesbians. Well, American society, will you please accept us? We'll do our very best to try to be good. And the people who were coming out in 1969 partly because they were doing so in the context of other things like the Black Civil Rights Movement and the feminist movement. We're saying, we don't need to kiss up to straight society in order to demand our rights. We want our rights whether they like us or not. But I think it's important to recognize that the Mattachine Society and the Daughters of Bilitis, as conservative, relatively speaking, as they were, and as conciliatory as they were, served an important intermediate role in the 1950s and the 1960s. Sort of, if the people who had come out in 1969 were forming the very first gay and lesbian organizations, they would probably have been much more timid about what they were doing. But because organizations like the Daughters of Bilitis and the Mattachine Society had existed before 1969, people who were fighting in the Stonewall riots were able to say to themselves, okay, we need something more aggressive. We're not going to be forming the very first gay and lesbian organizations, but we want to have gay and lesbian liberation. We don't just want to be fighting for civil rights. And as I said, the history of the gay and lesbian movement moves into a new stage in 1969. And hopefully someday, when I'm teaching this course again, I will be able to make more lectures covering that topic. In the meantime, it's been wonderful. Have a nice life. Bye.